In China today, the most powerful man in the world is having a meeting with Donald Trump. Not only is this the first time that a president goes to China on his knees, having lost their entire geostrategical advantage, but it's the first time that the most powerful nation in the world is non-white since the Ottoman Empire. I hope I didn't offend you right now just by acknowledging the facts that China is not our peer, they are superior civilizationally speaking. Let's keep it a buck. It wasn't a sealed deal until Trump's second term. Because of him, we lost the trade war, we lost the Iran war, we've been lost the infrastructure war, and anyway that we're still beating China, trust me, they'll catch up in a decade, and we'll get into how in a second. What's the main reason we got here? Because we insisted on underestimating them because we didn't read their literature, starting with The Art of War by Sun Tzu. So since most Americans do not know who the Chinese are, let me share with you who I've researched who they are, okay? We're looking at the greatest comeback in the modern world. In my short millennial lifetime, I remember China being a charity case. They invested in all the right stuff. Right before I was born, China was taken over by a man named Deng Xiaoping. And Deng Xiaoping just wanted to see objectively which is stronger, communism or capitalism. So what he did was he created these cities that were just investment zones where he would try things out. And if it worked, he used it. If it didn't, he threw it away. He was agnostic on which system was better. So they developed a hybrid. And every time something was successful in one of these like experimental cities, it would develop and then he'd disperse it. That worked for economic models, technology, and then in education. They invested, we divested. When I was in high school, America was at the bottom of the list of the developed world when it comes to educational attainment. Meanwhile, they've been at the top. So what happens when you develop that kind of rigor in your population? It's going to translate from field to field. I don't care if it's mathematics, technological development, whether it's science, biology, or diplomacy. But that's just the kids. The adults back in the day were on what's called the 996 workday. That's from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. The productivity went through the roof. But probably most importantly, we sold China our manufacturing back in the 1960s, and it was a strategic move to debase the black man's ability to fund his family. The mass deindustrialization is no coincidence that it happened right after the civil rights movement, right when the drugs came into the community. You ask any old head, they will tell you, yeah, there was numbers running and hustling, but you were eventually expected to get a job at the factory. Ask Joe Jackson. So what happened when we sold those away? China started out manufacturing us because they were doing it for pennies on the dollar and they didn't respect our patents. So they started duplicating. And you never go to war with somebody who can out manufacture you. Ask the South. That's why they lost the Civil War. They can produce as many weapons as we do in a year, in a week. But perhaps one of the most underestimated factors in the Chinese mind is that popular over there is a different strategy game than ours, right? We play chess. They play Go. We take so much pride in chess. Like we say, this is chess, not checkers. Go is an entirely different strategical game. And they do it on the world stage without us even knowing. And if you're playing chess against somebody playing Go, 99% of the time, you're gonna lose. You see, in chess, you essentially strike your opponent and take their position. There's a hierarchy between the pieces. In Go, you surround the enemy and cut off territory. In chess, the goal is the king. In Go, the goal is the board. Here's how that played out in Iran. We think of winning wars as going to the enemy's territory, knocking out either positions, weapons, or leaders, right? But what we didn't realize is that we were already surrounded when we entered. Why? Because not only did Iran already strike up a deal with China to use their satellites so they wouldn't need ours or their own to see our positions, not only were they getting some of their weapons parts from China, but it's the fact that the United States cannot manufacture weapons without rare earth minerals that China processes. So back when Trump had that trade war back in 2025, remember like Liberation Day or whatnot, not only did China impose its own counter sanctions, but it cut us off from the rare earth minerals that we need to manufacture our weapons from Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. And then we entered the war low on supplies because we had already been supplying Ukraine and Israel. Art of war, baby. They won the war without firing a shot. And here's where Africa comes in, because those rare earth minerals that end up in our weapons that China processes are mined from Africa. And smart African people have been watching this, necessarily wary of like neo-colonialism from these folks. But what you need to do is study them. Because if you don't understand the Chinese century of humiliation from the 1830s when the Opium Wars began from Britain to the time when Mao Zedong took power, then you ain't realizing that China left the blueprint for you. I was under the impression that China didn't suffer the things that black folks suffered until I read about the century of humiliation. Yes, they were carved up just like they were in the Berlin Conference. There was hella drugs going on. The Opium Wars were the blueprint for what happened during the crack era, and they still found a way to overcome. We underestimated them, overestimated our own abilities, rested on our laurels earned in prior generations. Now, BRICS won. We lost. And the sooner a fighter gets his head around his L, the sooner he can bounce back. That's my word for the day. I'm Theo E.J. Wilson. Share this message out. Holla back.